makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
The UN's COP26 climate summit is only days away. And I'm going to give you a sneak preview of what's going to happen, and that is nothing. Nothing. There will be, some positive changes at the margins, but let's be honest, we are screwed. There will be no solution for the climate crisis under capitalism. So let's just operate on the principle that that is the most likely scenario. Anyway, I'm sure there's going to be a major debate during the summit between the Western countries, which claim to be doing all the effort at reducing their own emissions, versus the developing countries like China, India, Russia, Brazil, etc., who, according to the Western narrative, have not done enough and are still increasing their per capita emissions and their total emissions, etc., which to some extent is expected, being that they are countries that are growing faster than the West, industrializing faster than the West. And it is an argument that a lot of Westerners give to kind of sort of eliminate any blame that they might have for climate change whatsoever. What better way to feel better about yourself than claiming that it's the brown people who are basically polluting the world? And this is an argument that I really detest, because there's an element of Western chauvinism in it. It's like, we're the ones that are actually, promoting the green investments and doing what we can. Yeah, because you're already industrialized. Like, you don't really, you already grew, you already built the factories, built the power plants that powered the factories at a time when you didn't have to worry about climate change. And other countries that need to develop, because poverty is also a thing, don't have that benefit. Now they have to develop under circumstances that will be more costly to them. Now, I personally think that climate change is not a national policy, it's a global policy. But that also means that Western countries need to, A, recognize what aspects of their economic policy making are contributing to developing countries increasing their emissions or not doing enough to reduce them. And two, finding ways of financing green investment in these countries. That really is the whole, the trick to it. So I'm going to show you a small snippet of a debate on the LBC. It's the London Broadcasting Corporation, where they often have these cross-question debates. And the MP for the City of London, now for the Americans who watch this, or for the non-Brits in general, the City of London doesn't refer to London. The City of London refers only to the borough that is what's called the square mile. So it's the, what used to be the old medieval city wall limits of London, which is now the financial, it's like Wall Street. It's when you hear in the British press say the City of London says, it's the exact same reference of when you read the American press and it says Wall Street says. It's a metronym. What is it, metonym or metronym? I forget. For the financial industry. So she's basically the MP for the financial system. And of course, she's a Tory. She's going to give this exact argument. So let's hear it. And when you listen to it, pay attention to exactly how she's framing it, and see the Western chauvinism that is inherent to this argument.
Nikki?
Well, I think the Western countries are doing as much as they can so far with trying to bring agreement together. But I think if we don't have China, India, Brazil at the table and agreeing, then we've got problems.
Well, they are going to be at the table. It's just their leaders.
The leaders are not, and I think that's a message that concerns me. That if the leaders aren't there, and you can have envoys, and I'm sure the people attending are very senior. But I think this is such a climate emergency. This is a global issue that, yes, collectives of countries can work together, and that's really important. And I think Europe is obviously leading the way. But if the three largest countries for emissions in the world are not going to be, the leaders are not going to be at the table, then I am concerned.
Is that a failure on the part of Alok Sharma or Boris Johnson to get them to come?
No, I don't think it's a failure. I think I think it speaks volumes about what those countries are really thinking about climate change, and they are the ones we've got to get on board. And that's what always frustrates me when we see the likes of XR and Insulate Britain and their actions in this country, where this is probably the greenest government we've ever had, and we are working very hard to reach our targets. They should be really aiming their frustrations at the likes of China, India and Brazil and perhaps Russia.
So, the first and most obviously stupid argument here is this idea that climate protesters like Insulate Britain or Extinction Rebellion should be focusing on China, India, or Russia. Well, they're in Britain. They have no say on what China, Russia, and India can do. They are British citizens protesting in Britain, and they can influence their country's climate policy. They cannot influence Putin's climate policy or Xi's climate policy. So that's absolutely ridiculous off the bat. And I mean, I didn't watch the whole show, but I can bet that she wasn't challenged on any of this, because they never are. They give this argument all the time and they're never challenged on it. Now, she mentions Russia. What's the industry in Russia that is the biggest contributor to their emissions? That's energy. Who buys Russia's energy? Europe. Europe runs on Russian energy. So is Clean Europe going to get a pass from being basically the main driver of Russian electricity energy demand? Because that's what they essentially are. No, they get a free pass. It's Russia's, that's the problem. Despite the fact that they supply Europe with a huge amount of Europe's energy. This is ridiculous. Ridiculous. And yeah, so here's a good article, a rare case of a good article from the New York Times about outsourcing pollution, which is basically the problem. So the reason that people like what's her name, Nikki Aiken, can give this argument is because Western countries like Britain can brag about the fact that, the headline number of their emissions, both total and per capita, have been going down. That's a reality. In Europe in general, emissions have been going down. I believe in the US as well. Whereas obviously in countries like China, I think in China they finally stalled. They haven't grown and maybe have declined a bit. I'm pretty sure they're growing in India. But here's a good chart of Britain's emissions. And I'm glad that they included Britain in this because it's the direct counter to her bullshit. British emissions are higher when imports are included. So if you take the gray line, which is without imports, so that's the headline figure you would see people like her bragging about, that, oh, Britain has reduced emissions from 550 million metric tons to 400, but I don't see China doing the same. Well, if you add imports, which is basically all the shit that Britons consume that is produced abroad in countries where environmental standards are lower, and therefore polluting industries that would not get away with it in Britain would get away with it over there, or would get away with it at much lower cost. Suddenly it doesn't look that nice, does it? In fact, in the last couple of years, well, this is not a new article, but up until the right before the financial crisis, it had gone up. So this improvement that we saw in the headline number simply didn't exist when you incorporated imports, and then they fell after the financial crisis. I don't know what what the latest number would be. And, you know, this is, it's not an easy number to calculate, but yeah, this is adding imports is a kind of a good proxy for it. So yeah, Dr. Hassan Beiji is an author of a new report on the global carbon trade, which estimates that 25% of the world's total emissions are now being outsourced in this manner. So it's a quote, carbon loophole. So yeah, this is what they do to get away with that argument. And the problem is that the reason they love this argument, the reason people like Nikki Aiken love this argument, is because then they have an excuse to not do anything. If the COP26 climate summit is a complete failure, they will blame China, they will blame India, they will blame Russia, they will blame Brazil. That's what they're going to do. And they don't understand that it's their responsibility regardless of what any of these other countries do. And to say that Britain doesn't have a historic responsibility as the first industrialized nation on earth is crazy. Britain, for much of its history, was, in per capita terms, the world's biggest polluter. That's a fact. You can Google it. You know, countries like the US that now are bragging that their emissions are falling is the country that has contributed to the most emissions over the course of human history. And it's not just the ones that are polluting now, because the amount of emissions in the air is cumulative. So that matters. There is a historic responsibility. And even if there wasn't a historic responsibility, it's every country's job to do it. I know because my country, Mexico, my so-called leftist president, López Obrador, does not care at all about the environment. And he also gives this excuse that why should Mexico have to pay for the fact that it only contributes like 2-3% of global emissions? Why should anything that Mexico does matter? And the answer is, yeah, it does. It does, because if you give this excuse, all you're doing is passing the buck around to every other country. And every other country can then use that same excuse to not do anything. And in the end, they won't do anything. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I think COP26 is going to be a complete failure. So brace yourselves, or, you know, maybe not yourselves, but start bracing your children for the kind of world that we are creating. And yeah, this is probably not my most optimistic video in any way, but that's the truth. But I really do wish people, when they hear this argument, just immediately destroy it. Immediately. This is not an argument that just sort of has to, you know, that someone can spout it in a debate like this and it goes unchallenged. No, someone needs to step up, and whenever they hear this bullshit argument, needs to debunk it on the spot. And it's very easy. Very, very easy. So yeah, don't fall for that one. Don't fall for that one. But this is probably the most annoying climate change, anti-climate argument that I have heard. So yeah, if you like this video, please like, please share. Most importantly, please subscribe. And even most importantly, debunk this stupid argument whenever you hear it. Whether it's on Twitter, whether it's in real life, whether it's on one of your Facebook friends. Destroy this argument, please. Thank you.